All right, so welcome everyone to our webinar, The Wild Truth About the Wildlife Trade, a webinar for veterinary students. So I'm Lauren Alley. I'm going to be your presenter today, and I am a co-manager of the No to Nature campaign. And joining us today, we also have the campaign director, Mark Gibson, and my fellow co-manager, Neve Vaughn. Give them a wave, guys. And we'd very much like to thank our partners who invited us to speak today, particularly the Exotics Club at the UWI School of Veterinary Medicine and the Exotics and Wildlife Society at the St. George's University School of Veterinary Medicine, as well as the Veterinary Students Association of Trinidad and Tobago. So first, just a little bit about who the No to Nature campaign is and what we do. So our goal is to end the harmful pet wildlife trade in Trinidad and Tobago, which, as you can see in this image, affects a large range of species. And to do this, we are supported by a coalition of 13 local and regional NGOs, including animal welfare organizations, scientific societies, wildlife rehabbers, educational groups, and of course, veterinary associations. And we combat the wildlife trade with a variety of activities, including marketing on social media and on our website, where you can find out a lot more about what we do. And we also facilitate rehabilitation center tours, but which has been a bit tricky over COVID. We also do a wide range of mixed method social science research, including pet keeper surveys, social media sales surveys of wildlife, and also key informant interviews. We also host a range of informative webinars, which you can find on our website, covering a wide range of topics. And one of those is this webinar today, which is part of our vet support. That's another one of our activities. And besides webinars, that entails workshops, clinic posters, and health guides for at-risk animals, which are all in the works and coming soon. So what is the harmful pet wildlife trade, and why do we want to stop it? Well, it's the process by which wild animals are taken from their natural environments and trafficked to become pets. And this process contains a range of harms, including harms to society. Now, people don't often think about this one, but the trafficked animals are coming along the same pathways and with the same traffickers as drugs and guns and even human trafficking. It gets really messed up. And the animals themselves suffer a range of harms in the trade, including really high mortality rates when they're being smuggled, as well as a host of physical and mental harms when they are kept inappropriately in captivity. And of course, these stressed animals can actually get quite aggressive, which takes us into harms to public health. So besides the fact that these animals can bite or scratch and otherwise injure their keepers and other people, remember, they're being smuggled across borders illegally without any proper quarantine procedures and pose a high risk of introducing disease. And the trade also perpetuates harms to ecosystems. So what you see on this map is an example of that. This map shows the distribution of imported invasive red-edged slided turtles in the wild in Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, whoops. Now you'll actually see that these turtles are mainly found around urban centers, and that's because they're mainly escapees and releases from the pet trade, because sometimes a keeper doesn't want an animal anymore and just dumps it in the wild. And this is bad because, as I mentioned, these guys are an invasive species. They're detrimental to our local turtles and our local ecosystems. So there are 4 stages to this trade: poaching, smuggling, illegal sale, and harmful captivity. So we're going to go through poaching now with 3 of the main types of animals that end up in the trade. So parrots and macaws. If you want to get a parrot and macaw for the pet trade, you have to take it from the nest. And this sometimes involves cutting down the whole tree to get the baby birds. And that's really bad because it contributes to habitat loss, but also the birds may not survive being in a falling tree and can be crushed. Another popular type of animal in the trade are songbirds. Now, songbirds are caught with mist nets. That's that black gauzy thing that you can see in this part of the screen. And mist nets are strung across areas where birds are likely to fly, and they get tangled in the net and they're caught that way. Now, this net was actually being used by scientists in Trinidad to study songbirds. But at that same site on that same day, trappers were also present. So we've got these two guys who are walking around with their bird cages because they're looking to do small-scale bird trapping, most likely. The way that you get monkeys for the pet trade is particularly gruesome. The trade targets baby monkeys, and as you can see here, they cling to their mother for a large portion of their early lives. So to get the baby monkey, you have to kill the mother. So a poacher will shoot the mom, and she and the baby fall together from the trees. The baby can be injured in the fall, and then they take the traumatized baby away from its mother's corpse in order to be trafficked. And then trafficked animals are smuggled. So this entails them being shoved into wicker baskets, small cages, or even tied up and put into boats to be moved from South America into the Caribbean. Now, a lot of the animals do not survive this process, and this is due to a combination of things. There's unsanitary conditions, the trafficking methods are unsafe, but also if traffickers think that they're going to get caught by the Coast Guard, in order to avoid looking guilty, they just toss their contraband over the side. And this includes live animals. Sometimes they'll even weight the containers the animals are in with bricks and stones so that they'll sink really quickly and look less guilty, which of course results in the animals drowning. So what we see here are some drowned songbirds and parrots, which were retrieved by the Coast Guard. Even the animals that get rescued alive don't always make it. This parrot is one of several that was rescued alive by the Coast Guard, received veterinary care, but later had to be humanely euthanized because its health was too poor for survival. And the animals that do survive this very unpleasant smuggling process make it into the next stage of the trade, which is illegal sale. Now, this can happen anywhere from roadside vendors to social media sites like Facebook and also WhatsApp. So this picture is actually a still of a WhatsApp video that a wildlife trafficker was circulating, attempting to market the parrots he was selling. Another place these transactions take place that you might not think about is pet stores. So, you see this pet store and it is using parrots and macaws and this songbird, the bullfinch, as part of its advertising. And, you think you buy an animal from a pet store, it's clearly going to be legit, but that's not always the case. And a lot of these animals are illegal and unpermitted. The next step of the trade is harmful captivity, where most of these animals will be for the rest of their lives until they die. So what's so harmful about captivity? Well, this is a wild animal living in a human home. There are many ways it can get hurt. For instance, a baby monkey is curious, it's playful, it can burn itself on a stove. They tend to be really destructive. They can suffer when they touch broken glass, but also they may even face abuse at the hands of their keepers. And this happens in particular once the monkeys grow out of that adorable baby stage and hit puberty, when they can become very aggressive. So you see this guy has these big scary teeth, and his keeper, who's unable to handle him, has shoved him into this tiny, unpleasant looking cage. And that's where he's going to be for the rest of his life. And this is really bad because monkeys are highly intelligent, active animals. So confining them like this exposes them to a host of psychological harms. Now here we see a male bullfinch, and bullfinches are one of the songbirds that's really popularly kept for singing competitions. And you see, he's in a cage, he's got some perches, but it's rather small compared to a natural environment like a grassland. So any bird that's confined to a small cage is at risk of things like muscular atrophy. But songbirds in particular have some welfare issues. The males are prized for their songs and the females are not desired. What this means is that when all the birds are caught as juveniles and you can't tell them apart, you might end up with a bunch of males and females mixed together. You can't tell because they're all brown. But when the males become mature, they develop black feathers, and they will be often treated fairly well by keepers and prized for their songs. But females and unpromising males will be released into the wild. I mean, that might sound good because the bird's going back into the wild, but they've been in captivity since they were juveniles, meaning that they may not know any longer how to fend for themselves or feed themselves and may be exposed to starvation. Parrots that are kept as pets are often fed inappropriate diets. In Trinidad and Tobago in particular, a lot of people feed them bread and milk, which obviously is lacking in nutrients. And it's also popular to just give them sunflower seeds because a lot of people don't know better. So then you end up with parrots with a host of nutritional disorders. And of course, parrots and macaws are often kept in inappropriate, boring, small enclosures, which for a large and intelligent bird often results in physical problems and mental harms. Other animals like ocelots can end up as roadside attractions in inappropriate enclosures like this one. So now that we've gone through what the trade is like, let's talk about some of the animals you can expect to see being traded. In Trinidad and Tobago, the two most common parrot species you might encounter are the orange-winged Amazon, which is local, and the yellow-crowned Amazon, which is actually from Venezuela. The yellow-shouldered Amazon is less common in the trade, but is vulnerable to extinction. The blue and gold macaw was in fact made locally extinct in Trinidad in the past, but has since been reintroduced to the wild, although they are still trafficked for the pet trade from South America, along with other macaws like the scarlet and green-winged macaw. And the green-wing has actually established an introduced population in Trinidad from pet trade releases. The most common monkeys you might encounter are the wedge-capped or weeper capuchin and the tufted or black-capped capuchin. In fact, the tufted or black-capped capuchin is another species that's established an introduced population in Trinidad, which may be in competition with all local monkeys like the red howler and the white-fronted capuchin. These species may also be encountered in the trade, but they're up for designation as environmentally sensitive species, which means that keeping one as a pet can incur a really massive fine. And you might also encounter squirrel monkeys and Guyana or black spider monkeys. And here we see three songbirds that used to be really popular in Trinidad and Tobago, but you'll hardly find them in the wild today. And this is due to a combination of trapping for the pet trade, habitat loss, and the use of pesticides. So these are the ruddy-breasted seed eater, the gray seed eater, and the chestnut-bellied seed finch. And all of these have local common names as well. But since we don't really have them in the wild anymore, and they are still in high demand for singing contests, huge volumes of them get trafficked over from South America. And it is common knowledge in the songbird communities that a lot of those trafficked birds will die from disease. And that's terrible for the birds, and it's also posing a huge disease risk to all birds in Trinidad and Tobago when they're imported and not properly quarantined. Now, some of the most common reptiles you might encounter are that red-edged slider turtle that I'd mentioned earlier when we talked about the map. And these guys are in the 100 most invasive species on Earth. And you might also find the yellow-footed tortoise or maracoi. There's also a red-footed tortoise. It looks pretty much the same, but with red on its feet instead of yellow. And both of those are native to Trinidad and Tobago, but the yellow-footed tortoise is vulnerable to extinction. One of the most commonly kept pet snakes in Trinidad and Tobago is the red-tailed boa, locally known as the macaws, and this is also a local species. Other species which are less frequently traded, but you might encounter are charismatic mammals, some of which are local, like the red-tailed squirrel, Brazilian porcupine, and crab-eating raccoon, which are all found in Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have ocelots, but they're relatively rare, and it's more likely that if one were encountered in the trade, it would have been trafficked from Venezuela, along with other large mammals like sloths, otters, tapirs, and even jaguars. So For the final part of our presentation, we would like to talk about some things that vets can do about the wildlife trade. And we can think of this as two things, actions and ethics. So that means actions vets can take and how you can apply veterinary ethics to decide if you want to act in the first place. So we at Nature Nature hope that vets may want to be messengers for change. And that means let your clients know about the harmful wildlife trade and let them know what their options are if they have a wild pet. You can talk to them about rehabilitation centers and the possibility of relinquishing poorly kept animals. Vets could also persuade potential keepers to just stop buying wild animals in the first place. So if you encounter someone who is curious about wild pets, thinking about getting one, or maybe they already have a wild pet and are thinking of getting another, you could let them know the true cost of obtaining these animals in terms of all the harms. And you could even convince them to embrace alternative animals, like maybe a rescue pet, like a dog or a cat from a shelter, or a domesticated bird species that's been captive bred, like a budgie. And you can also use your expertise to help keepers improve the lives of wild animals in captivity so that we can reduce some of those animal welfare harms that we were discussing earlier. But whether or not you decide to take these actions will be based on how you want to apply veterinary ethics, which, as you guys know, is a system of moral principles that apply values and judgments to the practice of veterinary medicine. And there are entire courses about this, which the vets in the audience have either already done or maybe in the process of doing. But let's briefly look at Principle 1 of the AVMA Principles of Veterinary Medical Ethics. A veterinarian shall be influenced only by the welfare of the patient, the needs of the client, the safety of the public, and the need to uphold the public trust vested in the veterinary profession, and shall avoid conflicts of interest or the appearance thereof. So with that in mind, we're going to pose some situations that vets may encounter when treating wild animals. And we're going to think about some questions that come out of these. Now, if you find any of these questions really easy for you to answer, or maybe they're difficult, or maybe one of them catches your interest, we would invite you to please take notes and actually share your thoughts with us in the upcoming discussion at the end of this presentation. So let's think about situation 1, opportunities to educate. Do you want to inform your clients about the harms of the wildlife trade? If they don't have a wild pet, do they really even need to know? What if they bring you an animal and you think, oh no, this animal's probably been smuggled, it's a victim of the trade. Do you want to tell them about it? Keep in mind that this is someone who's just come to you for a veterinary service, and it's possible that they'd rather not hear about it. So maybe telling them about it could actually discourage them from visiting your practice in the future. Or maybe not. Is it a risk you want to take? If you do decide you want to bring it up, what issues would you discuss with them? Would you want to talk about problems of illegality? These animals are smuggled in illegally. Would you want to tell them about the animal welfare concerns that are associated with trafficking and with keeping wild animals in captivity? Do you think they'd need to know about the public health risks that certain animals can pose? Or the ecosystem risks from invasive species or from supporting a trade that takes animals out of their native environment? Let's think for a minute about that legal issue. Do you require an animal to be licensed in order to treat it? Now, most of these animals are acquired illegally, but it is sometimes possible for keepers to get licenses and permits which allow them to keep the animal. But what if you end up treating an unlicensed animal in poor health? This animal comes into your office, it doesn't have a permit. Do you want to treat it? What are your ethical obligations there? And also, do you know what a valid permit might look like? Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, this can actually be a little tricky because a lot of people don't have a full permit. What they have is a permit application, which serves as a permit until they can complete the full process. And if you decide you don't require an animal to be licensed in order to treat it, would you allow someone to leave an unlicensed animal overnight at your clinic? Would you take responsibility for that? And finally, animal welfare. Would you take action if you encountered evidence of animal abuse? Like a monkey that's been beaten by its owner. Maybe a parrot that's being kept in a cage so small that it can't spread its wings, and that's just how it's going to be for the rest of its life. If you decide you want to take action, would you report the person? Would you withhold the animal from its keeper? What agency would you report this to? There's a few that might handle it, the police, the forestry division. And then if you make the report, what happens to the animal after that? Would you give it to a rehabilitation center? These are just some of the situations that vets might encounter when treating wild animals, and some of the questions that might arise. So we hope that this has given you a good starting point for the up and coming vets out there to start considering how you might tackle these issues in your own veterinary practices. And now we'd like to open the floor for the discussion and Q&A section. So if any of you guys have thoughts that you'd like to share with us, please do so. You can drop them in the chat, or you can use Zoom's Q&A feature. I see we already have actually something in the Q&A, and we've got some messages in the chat. So Mark and Neve will now be joining me for this part of the discussion.
Great, just bringing on some video. All right. Yeah, I can MC the Q&A here, Lauren. We've got Madison Kucinik coming in with our first Q&A question. So you having just gone over this ethics exploration, I think this is pretty relevant. Madison asks, how would you suggest approaching the subject of the wildlife trade with a client who probably has a trafficked pet, but without shaming them?
I mean, that's a really great question. And this is actually something that came up actually in some of our anonymous pet keeper interviews. So sometimes we'd ask, do you know if you have a permit for this animal? If you need to have a permit for this animal? And people would be like, what? I need a permit? I've never heard of this before. And people would say things like, oh, this is just how we've always cared for this kind of animal in my family, when you confront them about something like an inappropriate diet. And sometimes, you know, the people felt pretty bad about it. And, you know, you really want to encourage them to improve their practices without making them feel so bad that maybe they just never want to hear about this issue again.
Or if someone also is shocked by this knowledge and is not directed properly, they may in fact just release their animal into the wild thinking that it was the best thing for it. However, like we've already discussed, if it's, say, a songbird that's never flown outside of its little cage, it probably has muscle atrophy and could also potentially be introducing diseases to wild populations. So these are all things that, you know, you have to consider when broaching the topic with a client. We've got Ryan in the chat asking if there's right and wrong answers to the questions we've posed, or are there any more philosophical, or are they more philosophical or based on morals when the bottom line is the legality of the case? Well, really, these are just situations we'd love for you, our audience, to consider, and there are really no right or wrong answers. This is really how you best decide to apply your knowledge of veterinary ethics in a particular situation.
Yeah, they're definitely more philosophical questions. I mean, like for Madison's question, there really is no single right or wrong answer because it would vary depending on the kind of person that you're talking to. You know, some people are really open to hearing things. Some people are very wrong and strong, as we say in Trinidad. And you as a vet, I mean, you have to care for the animals, but you'd also have to sort of gauge the personality of the keeper, and maybe there's a right and wrong way to approach it with one personality type that might not work with another one.
Yeah, and I'll add. So I'm a criminologist, so we study this sometimes in messaging, and I think it would be up to, my perspective would be the veterinarian could try different messages. Some messages may resonate better with others. The animal welfare tends to resonate more with many wildlife keepers as opposed to the legality issue, because licensing and the licensing branch don't always work with extreme efficiency, we can say. Or the disease risk. A lot of people have no clue, and the family safety may be what you want to focus on. So there's a lot. I think, though, Lauren, Neve, you're right. It comes down to the situation and the person you're dealing with, would be my take.
We have someone who's asked anonymously, what would be the best advice for someone who has applied for a permit and has never been visited by the proper authorities? So they're stuck, especially in the case of rehabilitation work or something like that. It's all situational. Every situation is going to be different. The realities of a somewhat inefficient system is also at hand. Like we said previously, some people have simply an application for a permit and then never get a permit.
Honestly, like the best situation for someone who has applied but hasn't been visited by the authorities is hopefully you have that application form, because the application form shows that you're at least trying to do the right thing legally. And therefore, if anyone ever tells you anything about it, you can be like, here is my application. Please come and visit my house and do all the proper checks. I'm trying, because there are a lot of people out there who are trying and are just stuck in that situation.
We've got someone asking if there's a legal wildlife trade. Mark, you want to handle this one?
Not really, no. For there to be a legal wildlife trade, you would need to have like permitted breeding animals, and there's not a system for that for wildlife breeding. Some people have done it, but breeding also takes a lot of skill and ability, and that sort of legal captive bred industry can't on any day of the year, it won't compete with price. It's at least 10 times the cost of what you could buy an animal that's been wild caught. So that's why if you check our social media, we're most often saying, don't buy it. For every one parrot before you, there are 10, 20, 100 parrots that probably died in this whole process. And so the don't buy wild is important. I think for the animals in captivity, it's don't buy more and take good care of the ones you have. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no legal trade, really.
Someone's asking if permits are allowed for all the wild animals. Well, Mark, can take that one. You look like you've got stuff to say.
No, generally, no, not all wild animals. It depends on the policy at the time with the national government, but tends to be some animals are culturally accepted and normal, like the green parrot. But other animals, there are some very strict laws that prevent keeping this. And that would be things like an ocelot or a red howler or any sort of monkey. There's a lot of very strict laws. So it's only a narrow range that might be considered for normal permitting.
And sticking on permitting, someone wants to know if we have an image of what the license or license application looks like. I don't think we have that on hand, unfortunately.
I have an old version, but Forestry Division would be able to give you a copy of the permit with a quick ring to their office.
Yeah, they have a section on their website where they talk about permitting requirements as well.
So someone's asked an interesting question, which is, what would you guys say to someone who would argue that their wild species is better living with them than living in a rehab center or being humanely euthanized? Like I said, situational,
but
it depends on the care that the person is giving. It depends on the care available and the resources available to rehab centers, but it also depends on the risks posed by the pet in captivity in question. If it's potentially an invasive species, if the person is accounting for all eventualities, euthanasia may be unfortunate, but unless all bases are covered, the situation may call for it. Or perhaps the rehab facility is at capacity, perhaps a rehoming within the person's family network or friends who probably have better opportunity to care for the animal. Every situation is different.
The thing is, so a lot of people do argue that their pet, which is a wild animal, is better with them than anywhere else that's available. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people are giving really just stellar pet care. But sometimes people who make that argument are not doing as well as they could be. So it also depends on if that person is open to getting more information, learning to do better. Because some people are like, well, my parrot is super happy with me and I feed him sunflower seeds every day and that's totally fine. And that's not totally fine. So it really is about whether the person is open to learning more. And a lot of pet keepers, for animals like parrots are, but then other pet keepers are not.
Yeah, I'd point out there, in theory, a wild animal in captivity with the right care and enclosure, we see this in some of the best run zoos, those animals can live far beyond what they would live in the wild, just because they don't have predators, they're not having to forage for food as often. But the reality is that most wild animals in captivity in the Southern Caribbean live unnaturally short lives, that a green parrot can live up to, in captivity with good care, up to 80 years. But most people that we meet who have green parrots, especially green parrots that look a little rough, look old, you say, oh, wow, how old is that green parrot? It looks so old. It's 10, and that's what a lifetime of just feeding it sunflower seeds and not enough fruit and vegetables will do. So I think it's really comes down to it is, are they buying more animals? If they are, they're not really stopping the trade. And are they taking care of the animal that they have, or making the best decisions in favor of its care? So I guess that would be the philosophical ethical component. I don't think putting an animal, euthanizing it is the best way forward. But you have to find a way that saving one animal does not doom many, many more to come.
We've got a question, is there a way to better convince people not to participate in the trade from the poaching side? And is there a role that vets can play at this point before wildlife become pets? That's really interesting. Vets will possibly interact with poachers, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago. You're more likely to interact with someone who may be more likely a hunter who will opportunistically poach green parrots or macaws or other maybe megafauna that they may come across in our local forests. Our local species have been rather decimated by overhunting, game species particularly, but also, like we said, our blue and golds were made locally extinct by the pet trade as well as habitat loss. So there are potentials for vets to interact with people who may potentially be poachers. And this is really something where, how do you approach this topic with them? Do you tell them, oh, you can't do that? And you make them no longer want to come to your vet clinic again. Maybe it's an antagonistic situation. You probably don't want that to happen. They may have hunting dogs that you want to treat and also care for. You may want their continued support as a client. So it's a tough one, and it's really up to each situation and each vet and each personality as to how you may inform them. We found
I would say, oh, sorry.
No, please, Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say that Neve is right, but there's also that situation where some people might be thinking they want a wild pet, but don't fully understand what that entails in terms of the high mortality that these animals face when being trafficked, as well as just how difficult it is to care for a lot of these pets. And I think that vets can definitely get involved there. If you've got someone who's got a dog and they're used to looking after a dog, and then they casually mention, oh, and I would like to get a monkey as well, like that could be a good teaching opportunity. And that's a person, you know, who probably cares about animals. I mean, they're taking the dog to the vet. So if you tell them all about the monkey's mom getting murdered so that it can enter the trade, I mean, we've had people react really strongly to things like that.
As well as just general time and care responsibilities. Most people don't have a concept of how much time and money and effort is really required to properly care for a wild animal in captivity. So most people, once told how much effort is truly involved with providing adequate and proper care, they may be less likely to want to pursue a wild animal as a pet.
Yeah, that's what Samantha Gopal in the chat is saying something similar. She says she thinks a lot of people just don't know better, and they don't know how to properly take care of the animals. And that's where vets come in. And she says that vets need to educate them on how to be better and not just reprimand them and not provide a solution. And so I'm getting some agreement with that in the chat.
Yes. A lot of people, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
A lot of people truly, we've looked at the motivations behind people wanting to own wildlife as pets. And a lot of that, monkeys, there's definitely different motivators. So some people will see a monkey and they think it's cute and it's very anthropomorphic, it's human-like, it looks like a baby, they want to care for it. But it only stays like this human baby for so long. And it is in fact not a human baby. Some people really want parrots because of companionship, or they think that it will talk to them. Parrots mimic sounds, but how much of a conversation are you really having with the parrot? They're incredibly intelligent birds, but they don't have human brains, they have bird brains. How do we understand their motivations and then provide messaging to them that might counter those motivations in a way that is helpful and not antagonistic, and make them feel like, oh, well, I'm never going to talk to this vet again because they made me feel terrible about myself and my choices. So we don't want that to happen. We want to really truly understand the motivations and provide messaging that is directed to those very different motivations. Each person may be different, but we have seen trends in motivations.
We've got a couple questions that we haven't addressed yet. Someone says, I know that traffickers can be reported to wildlife. However, can regular persons owning illegal birds be reported as well? For example, in the case of their bird not receiving proper care. I mean, the simple answer to that is yes. Yes, they can be. And someone else following on to that asked, if you suspect abuse, what steps would you be able to take? And well, that does lead back again to reporting to the wildlife section of forestry.
I would add, you could contact our campaign. We are in touch with the TTPS representative assigned to animal welfare issues. And if you're ever really worried about it coming back to you, the same information is kept by Trinidad and Tobago Crime Stoppers. And you can make an anonymous report about animal abuse there. And it is required to go on through the channels to the right person. So.
Someone had asked, I don't think we'd addressed this yet, but how do I obtain a permit for wildlife care? And that would be through contacting the forestry division, and they will Well, they have, as I think I mentioned earlier, a page on their website that has all of the information and contact numbers for their various offices.
Someone says that they see a lot of wildlife pets on social media, and do you think it's worth interacting with those spaces to try and educate people, or is it likely to get negative feedback? Well, this is actually where we spend a lot of time interacting with people about wild animals and whether they should be pets or not. This Nurture Nature campaign is actually a coalition-based campaign, but we spend a lot of our time boots on the ground doing social marketing across social media. So you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram as well as Twitter, but I will admit we're not quite as Twitter friendly. And we've found some really, really interesting interactions there. We do a lot of work. We have a few series, Don't Buy Wild. We have a trade awareness series. We've got a Not Native series. And it's through this platform, these platforms, that we educate the public in as digestible a manner as we can about the harms of the trade and why one shouldn't. We highlight each specific animal. We found quite a number of animals in the trade, over 100 species at this time we've discovered in the trade. So we've not done each species, but we've definitely covered quite a few as to why you shouldn't want to have them as a pet. Also informing people about the different harms of the trade. And we've mostly found useful interactions in our comment sections and in our direct messages. Most people have never been told of this information before, and they find it quite useful and informative, and they share it. So we've got quite a lot of people sharing our content. So while our networks may be full of animal advocates and veterinary students and naturalists, their larger circles are not always quite as insular, and while social media can be an echo chamber, we hope that our message is spreading through the use of social media. And it's really quite interesting when people are debating in our comment section. We welcome it because it gets the discussion moving.
And I would like to say also that you guys do seem really aware of the fact that posting pictures of wild animals interacting with humans online can promote keeping those animals as pets. People are just like, oh, cute, I want one, as I'm seeing in some of these comments here. And they don't really understand what keeping the animal entails. And you guys as vets, you guys can think about responsible social media messaging of your own if that's something that you want to participate in. Some people will post animals that they treat and will talk about problems that these animals can encounter and like why these animals ended up in their offices in the first place. Some vet clinics have fairly active social media pages. And when you are interacting with a wild animal and you take a picture of yourself with it, you can also think about, is it wise to post this? If I post this, could I be encouraging people who don't really understand what this animal needs to try to go out and buy it because like it looks too cute and like it's having too great a time? You guys can think about that when you're sort of establishing social media brands if you want to.
Yeah. Should you be including disclaimers every time you post a picture of a wild animal that might have been in your clinic? These are all questions that vet students and vets have to consider. We definitely have also, part of our research has been involved in social media surveys of sales online, which is actually against Facebook policy. So not only is it illegal to say monkey for sale, it's also against Facebook policy, but it's not always kept as close an eye on. And you can report those posts to Facebook and they will remove them. As well, I just saw a message, question.
I saw a question I was wanting to respond to.
Go for it. We've been monopolizing the conversation for a bit.
This one's from Maggie McPherson, and I like this question. It had me thinking a quick answer, but also another question that I might pose in its stead. But Maggie asked, is there a way to better convince people not to participate in the trade from the poaching side? And is there a role that vets can play before wildlife becomes pets? So a lot of the poaching happens in South America. And as most of you guys have probably heard at some point in the last 10 to 20 years, there's an economic crisis in Venezuela. and actually throughout the whole bioregion. So supply side, work can be done, but you probably are talking something more like human development projects. But that's the supply side. I think I would reframe it and think about what you as vets can speak to and your skills and abilities. And I think it's demand side. Help people reduce their demand. And I might even add another one, which I think we've been dancing around a little bit because it's complicated, but there's not a great capacity for wildlife rehab in this country yet, is what I would like to say. There are some great rehab centers. There are some dedicated actors, but could capacity be scaled? Definitely. One thing we've gotten excited about recently, for instance, is in Belize, they have discovered that parrots, in fact, can be rehabilitated and rewild up to 10 years old and return to the wild successfully. You know, that would be something amazing to have here for so many parrots that get trapped in the trade and stuck in little cages and just sad and lonely. But we need support, and people can build to that. So I would find that the role for vets.
There's also a space for consideration or capacity building when it relates to the fact that a lot of these animals are not native to the Caribbean once they've been taken out of South America. So when we're talking about rehabilitation and release into our native spaces, we have to think of carrying capacity of the ecosystem. We have to consider the gene pool. We have to consider disease risk. We also have to consider things like invasive risks and competition and all of these things. So as much as we would love to see all of the animals released into the wild, this may not be viable for every single animal that gets caught in the trade. For example, if there is a macaw species that is not native to Trinidad and ends up at a rehabilitation facility, this bird ideally should be repatriated back to its native lands and rehabilitated and released there. So there is capacity, there's a need for capacity building at all sections, because in the case of this hypothetical parrot, it would need to then have a humane end of life captivity plan, essentially. It needs to then live out its life in a beautifully fantastic flight cage that is large enough for it and has all the elements that a bird may need to live out its life in as wild a way possible without potentially posing risk to native biodiversity. So we also have to have a conservation ecology mind as well when dealing with these issues.
As we're talking about care for parrots and macaws, someone is asking what's an appropriate sized enclosure for a parrot or macaw. Now, these will vary according to the legal regulations of whatever country you're in, but ethically, the absolute minimum is big enough for the bird to spread its wings and flap around. My personal answer is as big as you can go, because this is a wild bird. It's meant to be flying in the open sky, and this opportunity has been taken from them once they're in the pet trade. So if you can afford a flight cage, if you have the dedication for free flight training, that would be my personal ideal. And even if you don't, the largest, most naturalistic enclosure possible that mimics the wild. And, don't keep your parrot caged up all the time if you can't have it in a pretty large enclosure. I mean, let it out. Some people even, if you don't have a full flight cage, you let their parrots flap around in their house. Yeah, personally, I think parrots just should be able to fly around or as close as possible to that, but the next best alternative is the best one if that is not possible. And we've got another question. Have you guys researched into what factors are driving people to participate in poaching and smuggling? So Mark actually already touched on this. So there's that economic crisis in Venezuela, and a lot of people are out there just trying to survive. A lot of people who are involved in trafficking, even in Trinidad and Tobago. are from places that don't have a lot of economic opportunity. And that is just a huge issue that is unfortunately sort of outside of the scope of what vets can do, which is why Mark was emphasizing the demand
Yeah,
side.
I would just put it as an example. If you consider that Trinidad and Tobago is, depending on your measure, the third largest economy in this wider Caribbean region. It's like 8 to 10 nautical miles off the coast of the region of one of the poorest regions of Venezuela, which is like the most economically troubled country in the Western Hemisphere, or at least, you know, close to it if you want to look at Haiti. So you have you have people with tremendous needs, and they're going to sell everything and anything. And the wildlife trade really is very connected to other illegal trades, just general contraband, things that countries want to regulate, things like diapers and flour at times, but also other more serious drugs, guns, people. So it's just a huge illegal economy that unfolds. So this is one of those situations where trying to reduce the demand is going to have probably more greater effect in the long run at this point.
Yeah, as well as being exploitative to animals, the trade itself is highly exploitative to people as well. So many indigenous groups along the Orinoco are also exploited for their knowledge as to how to capture these animals from the wild. So all in all, that side of the trade is generally terrible and exploitative. And by reducing demand, we reduce the instances of this, or we would like to hope so.
We've got another question. Do you think that penalizing the pet stores that affect the welfare would be a good public first step? I'm leaving this to the criminologist.
I guess so. And Neve with me well over now almost 2 years, I guess. But we've done a full survey of pet shops around Trinidad, or near full. It's not really a regulated industry, and there are some actors in it that are well-intentioned and run good shops. But then there are a lot that clearly are just selling whatever they want. And so I don't think penalizing is the right word. I think you need to regulate it, that there should be basic standards for requirements for reporting and keeping, obeying laws as special actors, and probably the monitoring and the enforcement to go with it. These are fixed locations, so it shouldn't be that hard to send someone by and just check things out, on a random stop by during business hours. But that's not the sort of treatment they get right now. So regulation would probably go a long way with that industry.
Someone's asked if there have ever been considerations to join CITES.
Trinidad is a member of CITES, actually. It would be considered, however, a Category 2 country, which means that if I get this right, it's a signatory, but has not taken the additional step to pass legislation in support of it. It has as a default existing national legislation. So it's not as strong. CITES doesn't have as much teeth here. So that's another thing that if vets were ever interested in speaking up and asking for stronger laws, stronger implementation of this global standard against the wildlife trade, that would be great.
Yeah, CITES and SPOR protocols should be implemented. So it's really about trying to get that to happen. Yeah. Someone said, someone's responding to the penalizing the pet stores in the chat, and they say the most we can do before the court is recommend that the pet shop be closed. But yeah,
I mean, there's some that definitely are, I mean, there are pet shops in parts of Trinidad. You can walk in and see a cage filled with 100 bullfinches in a tiny space. And that's all sorts of illegal and out of season and everything. And yeah, there are definitely pet shops that should not probably, you should not imbue them with the public trust to do the right thing. Yeah, I would agree with that, Adrian.
We've got any other questions? We're closing in on our allotted time. So yeah, let's, any last minute questions we want to pose to the panelists or to each other in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be questions. If you guys have any further commentary on anything you've heard today, anything you may have learned about for the first time that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it.
Ria Guppy has asked if vets take any samples to do studies on diseases.
Well, honestly, we are not vets, so that might be a question that it would be better answered by someone in the chat. Although, I mean, we have seen at least one paper, I think Neve dropped the link in the chat earlier, where local vet.
There should be, I'll drop it again in the chat. It's
Dr. Rodside Paul at UWI is studying zoonotic diseases, and I know they've done some sampling. I think it depends on the veterinary clinic whether or not they would take samples and test, but there are definitely certain diseases that when vets see evidence of, they report it. That's not required under the Animals Act here in Trinidad.
And we have another question. What are the ethical implications of zoos and the exotic/wildlife they buy and sell and where they source these animals?
Yeah.
That's
same thing.
A complicated question. There's a lot of implication.
I think it just comes down to same thing for pet shops, is how regulated and looked at is this as an industry when we start moving beyond pet shops to zoos, all sorts of roadside zoos in Trinidad and Tobago. Are there standards to which they may be held? And is there anyone checking for those standards? There are, there's a place not too far from me in Tobago that makes me very upset to see the state of its animals. And actually, as a foreigner, rather surprised that anyone in tourism would allow that, because that's just gonna make some foreigners really upset one day. But it continues, and there are more progressive actors today, but it still is a very hard thing to get traction to see the sort of monitoring and standards to stop those sort of places. This is another great place where we hope to build these relationships with vets, because your voices matter so much. And maybe, even yourselves in your professional practices or in your personal networks, people who might matter and take this to heart. It's going to take a lot of people to try and figure out how to put this harmful trade to an end, or at least reduce it.
We've got an interesting question about whether we think the avian wildlife trade is more heavily exploited than aquatic wildlife trade in the Caribbean. That depends on if you're including freshwater and ocean species or marine species. We've definitely found instances where it's also, particularly for freshwater species, it's a particularly unregulated trade. The importation of fish would fall under a totally different act than the Conservation of Wildlife Act.
It's actually a lot to do with how wildlife is defined, and there are many different definitions for wildlife. So the way that it works legally here is that fish aren't in the Wildlife Act, and they're a whole other thing, as Neve is saying.
Yeah, we found instances of invasive species in native rivers and streams in Trinidad and Tobago that have only been introduced because of the aquatics and the aquarium trade. The greatest marine example would be the lionfish. The lionfish has been kept as an aquarium species, and it has now invaded all of the Caribbean. It started in a release in Florida. So, you know, the aquatic trade is definitely one that we would like to branch into and learn more about. It's not well researched, and we haven't covered it extensively ourselves yet. And as well as the fact that there are also coral species that are in the trade. We don't know what that would mean if they're Indo-Pacific species that end up in our Caribbean reefs. We don't know what that could do. Invasive risks are high when it comes to aquatics and marine species.
And Neve, there's a follow-up from that you can respond to pretty well. So Samantha was thinking marine because sea turtles are heavily targeted in Jamaica, where she's from.
Would that be as a pet?
No, I think I doubt, I hope not as a pet. But
we've not found any instances of sea turtles being kept as pets. Leatherback turtles are notoriously terrible at being kept even in the most established aquariums. They simply just are pelagic species and will swim continually into the sides of any container they're in. Hawksbills and greens have been successfully kept by massive aquariums as meat as adults. Yes, so that trade would. So yes, they are heavily targeted throughout the Caribbean for meat as adults, as well as the eggs are poached. How best to answer this question? I work in sea turtle conservation, so I have lots of feelings about this, but it's not particularly related to the pet trade. But there have been, we can take cues from conservation efforts and messaging from the sea turtle conservation in the Caribbean as to how we can use that messaging that has been found to be relatively successful in terms of reducing demand. This is a wild meat issue, so it would relate closely to other wild meat issues within the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago and overhunting our forests, terrestrial megafauna, as well as overfishing. So those issues of overexploitation those conservation efforts can use the messaging that has been previously found useful to deter poaching and demand. So where we have the most impact is conservation groups campaigns like ourselves, conservation groups, as well as vets, is really how do we best message or get our story across to potential people who are supplying a demand in this harmful trade, whether it be pets that are wildlife or turtles or other megafauna or for wild meat. So it's really about how do we best social market these messages so that people learn and not in an antagonistic, harmful way.
And well, we've about reached our time, so we'll take our final questions from Maggie McPherson. How can we get involved with Nurture Nature as vet students? And do you think you may spread the campaign into more of the Caribbean islands in the future? So yes, we definitely do want to spread the campaign. In fact, we can say this is one of our first forays into doing so, because here we have people from multiple islands already, and we've got vet associations from 2 separate islands. So yes, we definitely want to spread it. We're already doing it. And how can vet students get involved? Well, okay, so there's really, really basic ways, which would involve things like simply sharing our posts online. Anyone can do that. And it gets the message out there to a wider network, especially to other Caribbean islands, because of course, right now, a large amount of our following is in Trinidad and Tobago. And right now, a lot of our messaging does sort of center on that, but as we expand to other places, we can make messaging for those islands as well. That's the easiest thing. Other ways to get involved would be potentially volunteering your time when we do collaborative work with our coalition members. Now, these coalition members do include wildlife rehabilitators like the El Socorro Center for Wildlife Rehabilitation and Corbin Local Wildlife in Tobago. Vet students can volunteer with these guys. They're part of the Nurture Nature, and they would also, love to interact with vet students and get help from you. And we have Adrian York saying that he might also be of assistance and is a game warden at the Forestry Division.
Nice. That's great. Well, nice to meet you, Adrian. And yeah, I would add, so Adrian, we'd love to connect with you. And same thing is, I think what can vets do to help nurture nature? I think most of all is just reach out and say hello. We try to keep an open door, and we're really open to new ideas. We have activities that we put together now, developing educational webinars. We also have some materials coming out soon that'll support vets. And we're really open to other ideas. And so if you're looking for a short project, who knows, maybe we can come up with something. If you're looking for something long-term, we've got also a lot of long-term hopes and dreams that maybe you're someone who can help build that with us. It'll take, it's a trade that is unfathomably harmful and really out of control, and probably the biggest harmful, illegal wildlife trade in all of the Caribbean, here in Southern Caribbean. So it'll take a lot of people working together to try and put an end to this. So please contact us. We'd love to talk.
We've got someone saying that they love the presentation and they're there watching it with their 6-year-old son, or watching with their 6-year-old son who loves animals, and they want to educate him on the issues which exist. Whilst this was aimed at vets and their limitations with the current pandemic, can you advise on your programs that are aimed to young people, even how vets can assist in educating our young ones? So yes, the pandemic is a problem. We do have tours to our rehabilitation centers that are part of our coalition. We had that in mind, and pandemic has squashed some of those goals, but we are going to be doing them as virtually and safely as possible in the near future. Also, our other coalition members include lots of animal welfare groups. So we've got lots of volunteer opportunities with the animal shelters, as well as if your son may be a budding naturalist, you should check out the TTFNC, the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalists Club. They offer lots of great materials for young kids as well as adults, and really interesting opportunities to learn and experience the wildlife in the wild. And that's probably one of the best ways you can get involved, is you can encourage people to go outside and, appreciate nature in its natural habitat, and not in a cage that is inappropriate for it, but rather really appreciate our biodiversity all around us. And most of us in the chat, I believe, would be from the Southern Caribbean. And so we can all really appreciate that our fantastic biodiversity is really just all around us, and we should really appreciate it and build others and our pride in it, and how we can best conserve it and protect it for the future. And one of these ways would be reducing the demand of the wildlife trade, which poses such a risk to our natural biodiversity.
Thank you everyone so much for coming today. We really enjoyed chatting with you and sharing about the wildlife trade. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us through our Facebook page, or Instagram, or email, and
maybe even Twitter. We'll check it one of these days.
We're getting better at our Twitter, I promise.
Yeah, and we can connect you to our various coalition members if anyone's interested in volunteering. So just to wrap things up, thank you to everyone who came today, and special thanks to people who contributed photos to our presentation, including Exotic Pets Plus Veterinary Clinic and a whole variety of local photographers. And thank you to the veterinary associations who partnered with us to produce this webinar. And with that, we are a bit over time, so let's wrap up.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Cheers.